All right, we live?
We are live. Yeah. Just so Chris O and I think I mentioned to you guys, I think you probably saw Chris O and Mark aren't going to join us today.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Ethan, thanks for your email too. Keep us on task.
Yeah,
And then I do want to say there is Chris Collins. He's joined. I don't know Chris. He's here. So I don't know Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon. We met a while ago. I'm a homeowner.
Okay.
Calling in DC, but just listening to the conversation. I appreciate the chance to listen in. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks.
all right. I'm a little behind the game here. I'm pulling up the agenda as we speak.
Keep your eyes on the road, Chris.
Yes, sir. Glad everybody survived the storm. That didn't look like a lot of fun.
Well, it was breezy for sure. We lost power for, I think like 6 hours, starting at like 7 a.m. and then it came back on for 1 hour, and and then it went off again. And I was like, oh, they're just setting up another line. It'll be an hour, and it was another 8 hours.
Jeez.
So wishful thinking.
Yeah.
But we can't complain. All in all, everybody's happy and healthy. So
Yeah.
okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started here. It's the Camden Planning Board meeting from Thursday, September 21, 2023. It's a Zoom meeting. Public is obviously welcome, and any comments can be made through the Zoom channel, or if you happen to have Jeremy's cell phone number, you can text him any questions.
I don't mind if you give it out there, Ethan, if Chris, well, Chris is here, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, he's here. He won't need it.
Someone wants to chime in and they want my number, I can give it to him. Thanks.
That's
Sorry.
a public service. So the first item then is any public comment on any non-agenda items. And seeing none, I will move on to number 2, which is approval of minutes. It says tentative on my on my agenda. Is that tentative?
It's here. Do you want
Yeah,
to?
I mean, we did send around, right, just recently, the minutes from the other night, 2 weeks ago. They're
Okay.
very, very brief.
Oh yeah, I did look at those. That was from the Granicus meeting.
Yeah, if you guys are fine with that, you can approve them and say thanks, and we'll get them posted. I mean, the intent on minutes are not, especially when there's no decision making, like we don't want to go into great detail.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a workshop, and that workshop's available for people to watch. So
Right.
there we
Any
go.
discussion from any of the board members on the minutes? Go ahead, John.
I have not had an opportunity to read the minutes, so I can't approve them.
Got it.
Perfect.
We can hold that off till the next meeting. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
We'll table that one. Okay, that moves us right in then to the business at hand, and this is a workshop. We don't want to waste too much time jibber jabbering, so we're workshopping short-term rentals. It's a continued discussion. We did meet with Granicus, the data purveyor, and also they offer other services, as we learned, including registration and enforcement and consulting. And so we're going to be discussing that, and then also we're going to get on to a little bit of discussion on peers. So do you want to do the peers first, Jeremy?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, because I want to make sure we get that done.
Yeah, me too.
And then move on to the short-term rentals, which we can spend as much time as we want on, as much time as we have.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that on, the peer discussion, Jeremy?
Sure. Yeah, so I think everyone remembers the discussions we had. We had public hearing on ordinance amendments that are actually going to voters in November. And then the Harbor Committee did their work. The Select Board did their work and we tweaked the 108 amendments, which are the Harbor and Waterways Ordinance, a little bit, so that they only apply to existing structures, existing piers. So someone can't do a new pier. We're trying to keep the work going but at the same time, getting some changes to voters, because it's important when you do moratoriums to make progress. And, it's been a long time, so we've made some progress. We've we're going to regulate, hopefully, if voters approve, land attached floats, which have never been regulated before. And we're going to require new existing piers, not new, existing piers, if they want to rebuild or they're destroyed, they've got to make them adaptable to sea level rise, and they can go higher. But that applies to existing piers only. No new piers are allowed. That's what's going to voters. And I think, listening to the select board and listening to you folks, I think you've come back around to really, I think, wanting to prohibit piers, new piers, as I think what you've decided. And if that's the case, then we need to formally have some meetings on an ordinance amendment that would do those kinds of things. And we can do that. I just need that direction, and it takes a long time to get to June. June will be here sooner than we know it. We're going to have hearings and things generally done by
Didn't
February.
we just have June?
What's that?
Did we
Yeah,
just have June?
I know, Ethan. This is government ordinance and regulations in a
I know.
town
I'm
meeting
just,
form of government is what it is. And it's a good thing. It's democracy, but but I also wanted to mention, Shenley and I were
Yeah.
reviewing this, and we've talked, the moratorium specifically talks about, everyone's been talking about piers, but the moratorium, actually, the language talked about piers and other structures. There are other structures we haven't talked about, and the Harbor Committee actually hadn't talked about them either. And I think it's important to have that conversation, because if you guys want to prohibit new piers, but the moratorium talked about other structures, and you guys didn't talk about them, and nor did the Harbor Committee. I figured the kind of Harbor Committee would get there, but they never did. It's something, a conversation I'm going to have to talk to them about. And so Shenley can put up on the only reason I bring this up is for direction purposes, and I think you can decide pretty quickly, as I think Shenley and I did once we reviewed it. This is from the Harbor Ordinance, and this is 108-24. This is talking about the Outer Harbor. 108-25, which I'll talk about in a second, is the Coastal Harbor section. This section talks about if this is what's regulated in the Outer Harbor. It says no piers, wharfs, bulkheads, marine railways, mobile vessel hoists, private breakwaters, or any structure requiring a permit shall be permitted in the Outer Harbor, including Sherman's Cove, except as permitted below. So those are things that we haven't talked about, which are wharfs, bulkheads, marine railways, mobile vessel hoists, and private breakwaters. And the same wording is in the Coastal Harbor section. But I want to just point that out. If you look at the definitions of what these things are in the ordinance, I think what the community really intention here is to prohibit residential piers, because this applies to only the moratorium only applies to residential piers. It does not apply to commercial piers. But like a private residential breakwater that someone could build, and they could get permitted in theory because it's allowed, which is a structure placed into the waters of the for the principal use of breaking and reducing the force of waves. That's, I think, something we don't really have any of those that I'm specifically aware of. I'm not sure we would want private residential breakwaters, and same with private residential wharfs.
Texas has a nice one.
Or bulkheads. A bulkhead is a permanent solid or semi-solid porous structure or wall along the shore to retain, stabilize, and protect the shoreline from wave or other waterborne erosion. That is not the way to address sea level rise by building walls up around. And I would think we would not want private bulkheads either. So that's where Shenley and I we were reviewing these ordinance, and I know you guys really want to, sounds like prohibit piers in the out new ones in the outer and coastal. But I don't want to miss something as we're drafting some regulation if we should really be picking up private residential bulkheads and these other things. Does that make sense to you? Wharfs, you can go down to the definition of a wharf. A platform type structure connected to the shoreline and built parallel therefrom over the water, supported by piling or cribbing used for berthing, loading, or unloading of vessels. I'm not sure if you guys don't want piers, I can't imagine you want private residential wharfs either.
Yeah, no, I think those are all kind of lumped in the same group
Okay.
for me,
Can I just-
Can we go back to the ordinance that lists the,
Outer coastal, outer, this one?
yeah, the one we were looking at before,
Now,
yeah.
keep
either
in mind,
one.
this
I think
is, keep in mind, this is the harbor ordinance and not the
Right,
the zoning ordinance, but this one covers a lot more stuff than the zoning one does, and I think
I
it's
see,
important.
okay.
I have a quick question regarding bulkheads. So what happens if somebody out there in the outer harbor, if the seawall isn't enough, if there is, for some reason they're having damage or whatever, and I don't know enough about this, but I just want to ask the question, is there something that we would want to allow permission for a temporary bulkhead, for example, if a storm is coming or something like that? Would that ever be a situation?
I don't know that answer. I think that's probably a question for some marine engineers to kind of weigh in on, to be honest with you. I think from a sound planning and from a climate resiliency perspective, you do want to adapt, but you generally you got to retreat, at some point. That's kind of the standard protocol. I can't imagine. I don't know.
All of these things are pretty much in the water, right? That's the whole
Correct.
point here.
Right.
If somebody needs to build a berm in front of their house or something, or elevate the cliff, or something like that, that's going to fall into the shoreline zoning and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily going to impact the harbor ordinance. The reason why I asked you to bring this up is, what if we just, for simplicity's sake, read the first sentence and put a period at outer or after including Sherman Cove, and then just strike the rest of it. It's pretty simple.
We'll have to have some standards for the existing structures, because those would become non-conforming structures and they're allowed to be maintained and
Right.
improved over time.
Sure.
So
Well, that's already before the voters, though.
yeah, we would need to tweak it though here and in our ordinance elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm not saying we don't need to make things even, but essentially that's what we're talking about, right? At least
Except
some of
we
us.
would-
We haven't had a vote on it, but
I think we still need to make sure that we're maintaining the possibility for commercial and municipal structures.
okay. Except for commercial and municipal.
Right.
Yeah, I see. Or whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're down to then is whether or not the board, we have a quorum here with 4, and we know Christo's leaning on this anyway. So, I'm going to go ahead and just move. I shouldn't move for a vote until we've had a discussion. So, is there a discussion on the possibility of, again, this all just is the planning board with their idea of what they think is best, sending it on to the select board to see if they'll sign off to send it on to the voters. So in the end, we're just putting an idea out there, but it's not going to change the world unless everybody decides it's what we should do. So go ahead, John.
I'm a little bit of the odd person out on some of this discussion. I'm okay with the idea that these sorts of hardening structures at the edge of the harbor, that they should have more of a comprehensive approach rather than individual homeowners each trying to protect their property. But I've talked in the past that I don't see the additional limitations on piers specifically as being a big problem in the outer harbor or what's the one even further out?
Coastal.
Or the coastal. I don't have a strong feeling on it, but I continue to think that it's a solution looking for a problem. And I guess as long as we keep the door open for some sort of a municipal sponsored comprehensive approach to addressing rising sea levels, however that might be, I wouldn't stand in the way of a board recommendation.
Okay, yeah, and I think,
That's a good point, John.
yeah, and I absolutely agree with everything you just said, John, which is, we are going to be looking at municipal actions. There has been some talk about potential for municipal piers in the outer and not on the coastal, but in the outer harbor. There are some access points and things like that. I know Lake Beach is one of the potential locations. I don't think that's something the town is planning to do, but I agree with you that we should reserve the option for municipal sponsored anything, breakwaters, any of these things. I wouldn't, and commercial. Yes, I think, we want to be a working waterfront to an extent. I think that the marina across the bay or the harbor is an asset to the town and provides jobs and certainly brings a lot of people into town. So we want to make sure that we don't, ban everything from that. So I would agree with what you said, John, to reserve for municipal and maybe an allowance for commercial, but obviously with a stringent review process. Jeremy?
Just to clarify, I think what John is also trying to say, and I think you're maybe got it, Ethan, is that if there's a location in the harbor, whether it be outer or coastal, and it's residential, and there are issues, sea level rise issues, if it's part of a holistic plan to address protecting, private municipal infrastructure at the same time addressing it holistically in a certain area, I think that's what John is kind of getting at. Because we don't know the specific situations on every single residentially zoned shorefront, right? I mean, there may be a whole stretch that has some significant issues. And I think this is important too, and what we're starting to do in our office a little more than that's ever been done. If someone's coming in for a shoreline stabilization project, we are asking some questions now on how that impacts properties on either side, because some of these things never get addressed by the DEP. And it's really property specific, when a lot of these things should be, more holistically looked at. So perfect. Does everyone understand and agree with that?
Well, I think we should have a vote on it, but yeah, I mean, does anybody else have any questions about that, Pat?
No, I don't. I think it's a great idea, though.
Okay, and Lucia?
No, I'm fine with it too.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and do a formal roll call vote on, I guess we don't need to do that really. We're not deciding anything. You're just gonna go forward with crafting something to bring to us for a vote.
Yeah.
So that
And
gives you some guidance.
John, I may reach out to you for some language and some thoughts on some of that, John, if that's okay.
Love to do it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be really good. Thanks, John. And yeah, it's just to address specifically what you brought up, Jeremy. Just so long as we're doing something that allows for something from a holistic sort of municipal or governmental approach, that's great. But we don't want to loophole anything in there that allows private stuff to take action. In a sense, where it's not part of a holistic plan.
Understood.
Okay, all right. So that we can put the pier thing down for now and move on to the short-term rentals. There's been a lot of, we had a lot of good information from Granicus. We didn't have a lot of, we had some discussion with Granicus themselves. We didn't have a lot of, board discussion. I did float out a couple of articles, and then I think you all saw Lucia sent out something about it was on the news, and then an article in the Bangor Daily News about what they're doing up there. And so I guess it's just sort of an open discussion, but mostly what we're looking for, Jeremy, is sort of direction on where we're going. Or Shenley, either of you, is that what we're looking for?
Oh, right, yeah. Just you want direction, I guess if you wanted to, were there any high points or anything that you wanted to take away from the presentation that Granicus gave you? Like, is it spurred any other ideas or thoughts or, other than what we've already been on? I mean,
I see John's got his hand up. Go ahead, John.
I can start off. I thought the Granicus presentation was very good. And I thought that the packet of materials that you've included in some of their recent correspondence was very good. I was disappointed that the major commercial platforms don't help municipalities unless they're dragged in kicking and screaming. So that was a disappointment. I think that if we proceed, I'm certainly supportive of a business license and a registration, and we can get into a discussion about the details of that. But I think that we should definitely adopt something that we can enforce, and I'm not seeing a way that we can do that effectively without hiring somebody like Granicus. And I don't know if they're the only game in town or not, but
they're not.
the idea of getting access to the data, I think you start off with registration and you have penalties for people that don't register and use that as the mechanisms for ensuring, life safety and nuisance and neighborhood compatibility. And I'm even sympathetic to the concept of having somebody that's got a local address being the sponsor of the short-term rental.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning an agent.
Well, some of the examples that I think were in the materials that Granicus sent to us was that in order to have a license, you've got to be a short-term, or you've got to be a local resident.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. That was raised. The local residency requirement was one of the things. Yeah, and it's funny because it felt like at times we were talking across each other with Granicus on some of that stuff, because we used unhosted or non-primary, and then they were talking about residential residents, and in fact I think that letter/email we received from one of our citizens referenced the residency requirement is a problem, but I don't totally disagree with that. I still am looking for, I am more and more convinced, and based on what the research that's out there and the stuff that I've seen, that that this is a way to impact the available housing issue. And so I am going to be pushing for stronger than just registration and compliance and all the great points that John brought up. I agree with all of those. but I am definitely still looking to do what we can to limit I mean, we've already seen how many there were. I mean, and it's changed over the last 5 years. They're growing almost exponentially. And, you know, the only reason why they haven't grown faster is because there's no housing stock. I mean, that's the reality. If there were more houses on the market, more people would be buying them up and put them into short-term rentals. I'm convinced of that because it is a very profitable business in town. So, I guess for me, you know, I know we had talked about like the 6-week period, and then we heard from Granicus that was not a very enforceable. It was a very difficult to enforce idea, so I'm moving off of that. I am looking sometimes at this idea of a percentage. I think Bangor just did 1%. Is that right? Now they have a lot more houses than Camden. And we would have to sort of, you know, run those numbers and see how those numbers stack up and how many units that allows, or whether we think that's the right number. We just tend to pull numbers out of a hat, right, and see what we think feels good. But you know, that's an option. And then, you know, the idea of I'm still not moved off the idea of anything unhosted not being permitted. So you know, I'm willing to discuss with everybody, and I'm certainly willing to listen to our citizens. And, you know, I want to involve people. I'm keeping an open mind because my end goal is to get something that can pass the voters. And so the more we hear feedback from the town, the better off we will be. Nice cat there, Pat. Always like when the cat joins the meeting. But I definitely still am very strongly looking at what we can do to limit the reduction of the housing stock that we're seeing. And if you think about that, like that number, what was the number? 350, something like that.
At least.
Yeah, and they were pretty confident that a high percentage of those were unhosted. I mean, don't tell me that those houses go on the market for sale or for rent that we don't make a dent in the housing market. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just it's straight it's supply and demand, and I'm not an economist, but it is supply and demand.
But
So,
Ethan, I do politically, I think that it would be hard to get the community to swallow a prohibition on 90% of the Airbnb rentals in town.
right.
No, if it's an exact, we don't really know, or we're not aware if that's an exact percentage though, John, either. That's one thing that I was wondering about too, because I think it would be helpful if we could get rid of some of the unhosted short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's you know, one of the questions that I ask myself is how many people who vote in Camden own another house that they're renting out on Airbnb? I'm going to guess that it's not that high a number. So unless we've got people who are just fierce property rights advocates that I can do whatever I want with my property, you know, everybody else be damned, or I'm missing something, you know, then I'm not, you know, again, I recognize that it's a politically thorny issue, and it's the responsibility of the planning board and the select board to educate and involve the community. But it's kind of like that thing, like why would someone vote for something that doesn't benefit them, or vote against something that would benefit the town, and they see no benefit from keeping things as they are? Now you could argue that there are people, it may well be that shop owners in town feel that Airbnbs are good for the community and for the environment, I mean, for the economy in Camden. And so we want to hear from them. You know, I want to hear from the lodging industry. Are they at maximum capacity all year round? Or are there periods of time where they're, you know, even during the summer where, I don't know, is Lord Camden Inn, is it running a 70% occupancy rate during Camden International Film Festival because there's so many other places to rent? or they maxed out and then there's overflow and that goes to the Airbnbs. We don't know those things, but I'd be interested in learning from people, because that gives us the opportunity to make a more balanced decision. You know, I'm willing to talk about, as was discussed. I forget the gentleman's first name now. All of a sudden, anyone? But
Are you
Which one?
talking about the guy who spoke
From-
in the
from
workshop?
Granicus, yeah.
Oh, no, I don't.
Jeffrey,
Jeffrey, I think it was it Jeffrey?
I think it
Jeffrey
was
Brennan.
Jeffrey. That's right. Yeah. And so Jeffrey was saying things like, you know, you could do a percentage or limit or cap the number and put them into a lottery, that kind of thing. You know, that way, that I'm okay with that. You know, if somebody wants to play the lottery and try to get an Airbnb for a year and then, you know, come back and next thing you know they won't do it or won't necessarily be able to do it. That's going to deter someone who's looking at it as a long-term investment and that kind of thing. So the people who are using it to help pay their mortgage on their property and stuff, I think we've all agreed that that's a use that we support, so long as it's not, you know, against what we already have in our ordinances. So go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, you know, on the Granicus website, I did have a look at a couple of different webinars that they had, and one of them kind of had an interesting discussion regarding zoning and regarding business and you know, some of these properties, if it's not primarily used as a residence, but primarily leased out or rented out as, you know, a VRBO or Airbnb or on one of the other sites, that it becomes a business and then it's a commercial property. And Maine's, I guess the Maine state definition of a commercial property is a property that is leased for profit. I couldn't find a stipulation on the amount of time that it's leased for profit or whatever. But then the question is if it's a commercial property or if it's a business, is it zoned in an area for business? And, you know, obviously a lot of these are not, they're residentially zoned. And so, you know, maybe there's some teeth in that. But also I do like the idea of a lottery, because that does deter people from assuming that they will be able to lease this year round as an Airbnb or as a VRBO. So those are two things, but there are some webinars that Granicus has that is, you know, that are really quite interesting and have some interesting ideas, including the fact that if you're going to charge for a business license or a permit, and as a lodging as a lodging entity ourselves, I mean, I think we would be for what Jeremy was talking about, a larger fee, because, you know, there's all of this takes a toll on infrastructure, whether it's sewer or, you know, water, fire, safety, all of that, you know, it definitely has to pay for it. And I think that would be a huge benefit, you know, to the town as well, if you were able to register them for a decent amount. So that's kind of a couple of different things, but it's interesting. I'd like to hear more about, Jeremy, I know you and Shenley have probably dived into a lot of the zoning aspects, and, you know, if there's anything that precludes long-term rentals in the, I'm sorry, short-term rentals in the zoning, if they are considered businesses.
Yeah, they're not really. And I was just gonna go to the definition of dwelling. Let me get there. Because as I recall, it says permanent or temporary. And I think that may be a problem for us, or something we need to address.
Mhm.
And then I was chatting with the assessors about the whole idea of, how those are assessed. And if the idea, I guess, is if you do want them and allow them, and they're commercial, as you say, they're not someone's primary residence, and it's really about a commercial it may be possible to come up and you want to allow a certain number of them or a percentage. There may be a way to allow them and create a use for even the residential zones, right? This coastal residential and the village extension out in the rural areas. That allows, or the use is in essence a short-term licensed short-term rental, which is a single family home or a 2-unit or whatever. And then it's possible we're looking at the idea of the assessment on those, on how that would play out. So we did ask that question. We're having conversations about it. It's possible that those can actually turn into commercial properties.
Right.
So the assessment could be different. Now, no towns have gone down this road in Maine because I think everyone is afraid of this issue, right? Everyone, I think, thinks that the community benefits from it. But I think they've been, and it's because it's, new in the last 10 to 15 years, right? 10 years, 5 years, it's really ramped up. But I think these are the questions that all these communities are having right now in these discussions. I mean, I was back in Bangor, 6 years ago, and we were having those conversations there. Are we going to start regulating short-term rentals? Bar
Right,
Harbor
and didn't-
having it forever, and they ended up coming up with some to cap them, a certain percentage.
Yeah. And didn't Bangor, I just read the article quickly, but it seemed that they were basically arguing that none of the Airbnbs currently existing were permitted. At least the ones that operate, as you say, like a business, because they didn't have anything in their ordinance to allow for them.
And
Is
that's
that
the
essentially
standard.
that's kind of the case. That's kind of the case here as well. If they're operating a commercial business in a
That's-
residential zone.
Yeah, I ran that department up there. That's a standard, that was a standard line that I always thought I could say, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the reality is if you look at the definition, like attached, it's dwelling unit and not dwelling. A room or group of rooms designed and equipped exclusively for use as permanent, seasonal, or temporary living quarters for only one person or family at a time, containing living, sleeping, toilet, and cooking facilities. It doesn't include RVs. And then at the end, it talks about it can't be rented for less than 7 consecutive days. So very clearly, dwelling units in town are allowed to be permanent or temporary or seasonal. So, that's the dilemma that I think everyone overlooks, is that those words in the dwelling unit definition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious how that played out here. Go ahead, Pat.
Could we change the definition?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah.
For
Any
sure.
of this is
And
up
we
for
wanna-
grabs.
We want to make everything but you want to make sure to address the issues that you've had at around the lake. And those are traditional, I think. I mean, the lake is also changing, the lakefront properties are changing. We're seeing, camps being torn down that have traditionally been camps,
Mhm.
torn down, and then little, I don't want to say it, McMansions, but they're very nice homes.
Yeah,
Much larger. They meet all the requirements, but they're very different than the traditional camp that was there. And imagine what those will rent for. I mean, we know that there's some towns, some houses houses in Camden that are renting for $8,000 a week.
Yeah.
To rent, so we got to look at all those things, but we also want to make sure we also don't impact seasonal motels and hotels that may be open seasonally. I think that's just important to think about too.
Well, those are already going to be zoned and permitted, right? I mean, seasonal hotels and motels.
Yeah, but it's matching definitions and uses up is really, it takes a lot, because some of them have a whole unit, right? But it's temporary and they're only seasonal. So I'm just throwing that out there.
But they're also zoned commercial.
Not necessarily.
Tell me a hotel or a hotel or something in town.
Coastal residential. There's a specific allowance for motels and existing motels and hotels out there.
But are there any? I'm
And they
trying
have
to,
dwelling units on those properties.
right, but they're commercial.
Well, right. I don't know. I think it's. I don't know. I don't know. I'll get there. I'll dive back in there. I don't know where I was going necessarily, Ethan. There's also people, I just want to point out, that have seasonal cabins in town and that have permitted seasonal homes. So, and temporary, that they know that they're going to use them temporarily. So I think it's just important if it's.
Well, I agree that it's important to get all the
Yeah.
definitions lined up. Absolutely. What I want to try to avoid is a lot of sort of tangents, going off on this tangent and that, when really we need to get to the core of things and decide where our stomach is for this and what we think is best for the town.
Yep.
So because we can iron out the details, but really what we need to do is, and we've talked a lot and not made any real progress. And we're not gonna, this is just a preliminary workshop. It's preliminary after about 7 prior preliminary workshops. And so we can talk till we're blue in the face about what we think we should do. And we need to get to a point where we decide what we think we should propose and then get something down and then workshop that with the community and take feedback. That's the way I think it should probably proceed. So I don't have an answer for that, but I think that the next meeting that we have on short-term rentals, it should be rather than just a workshop, more of a public hearing, or at least advertise it as an open invite to the public and take some feedback on some issues. And maybe, go ahead, Pat, I see you're raising your hand.
But shouldn't we get certain things set down first? Like, are we going to try to ban unhosted short-term rentals or not? Are the goals, we had a certain list of goals, are those still okay? Because one of the things I was reading about is how they're saying it's so important to make sure your goals are in line with what the community expects, for example.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. We did with the select board share those goals and then have some discussion around it. I was a little disappointed actually that hadn't been shared with the Granicus presenters prior, because it's okay. They acted as though we were just starting out and we had been doing this for some time. And I thought what we had laid a pretty good, it might have allowed us to get a little more narrow focus on our actual concerns, but that's okay, because I think we got plenty from the presentation. But it was kind of funny that he's like, well, the thing you should have is these goals. And it's like, well, we have these goals. And so that would have been helpful, I think. But John, I see your hands up.
I think our goals are pretty solid, and I think they'll serve us well as we go forward. I think that overall, the regulation of short-term rentals is not going to be solved in just one ordinance change. I think, there'll be an initial set of regulations, and I think there'll be certain things that we get wrong that we'll want to come back to, or the community will want us to go back and refine a little bit. So I accept that idea that it's going to be at least a 2-step process. And I think that our priorities for our first step is to get a good handle on where the short-term rentals are and get them registered, and offer carrots and sticks to getting people in, so that we can really get a good handle on what we're dealing with. And then if we need to start to ratchet down the number that we allow in the community, then we give some priority to the first people that have come in and have been cooperating and have been operating without nuisance calls, and so forth. So, I don't necessarily, I think it would be a little bit of a mistake if we try to accomplish everything all at once, and in doing so, not achieve our goal at all.
Yeah, and I hear that. I will provide a counterpoint. And the counterpoint for me is, first of all, Granicus will do that for us, will give us that information. That's what they do. If we go rely on a carrot stick registration ordinance to get more data, we're just kicking the can down the road 2 years without any progress. Second, look at what New York City did. Boom, pal, you can't do it. There may be lawsuits. I don't know what's going to happen down there, but they just said we're not doing it anymore. And Bangor, that up there, I don't think they've had a registration ordinance going for a while. I don't know. Jeremy can correct me, but they just passed an ordinance that looks pretty clean, caps at 1%, and says here we go. And I don't know all the details of it, but there are multiple towns along the coast that are similar to Camden that have already enacted ordinances. And yes, they may require tweaking. They may require, they may not be perfect. There may be learning lessons in there, but we're trying to gain as much as we can from all of these other places that have done it, and then come up with something that we think has the best chance of success. And I'm not going to support. I will be opposed to just doing a registration and licensing ordinance only without any limitation on how anything that's going to actually contribute to housing stock, because I think that's a primary goal. Go ahead, Lucia.
Yeah, I would I agree with both of you, and I would definitely not be opposed to ratcheting down sort of right away, because I can just tell you from the lodging industry, from our standpoint anyway, we hear it all the time from our guests who say, well, I can't find a restaurant to eat in because, part of it is that there's not enough wait staff, but it also means that there's not enough restaurant seats to go around. And no, we're not full all the time. I mean, I would say we're about at 80% capacity. There are weekends when we're full, but it definitely the Airbnb aspect has hit us, or the VRBO aspect has hit us. That's not to say that, of course, we can share the wealth, and there should be some of them, but I would not be opposed to having a cap on them.
Go ahead, Pat.
I would agree with having some type of cap also. How we approach that can be up for discussion still. And I also think that one of the things that I was reading about as well is, I think John mentioned it, where you initially allow, I don't know if you want to call it a cap or a grace period, for the ordinance to be out there, and then revisit it in a year or two to see how it's doing, and allow yourself to maybe adjust if you need to. That seemed like a good idea to me when I first read about that. And I also think use of an outside consultant would definitely be of benefit. I'm not sure what our budget is or anything for something like that, but it seems like it's a requirement probably to be able.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Just a quick follow-up. I can see supporting a cap as well.
Mhm.
And that's as
Okay.
opposed to the prohibition.
Right.
What number
I
is
think,
that?
I think anytime we use the word ban or prohibition, we're going to get some strong resistance. And so, I actually, try to resist using those words. But it's and we certainly had some pushback at that one meeting with the select board that we were trying to ban all short-term rentals, which clearly we haven't discussed ever. But at the same time, the words have been used when we speak specifically to unhosted, and so I think it is good to try to avoid using that term because we are open to a reasonable use. It's just a matter of, and I think that was one of the things that we learned possibly from the Granicus presentation, is different ways to approach that cap, whether it's a lottery or something like that. Capping the days, as I said earlier, didn't seem like a great solution, even though I thought it was a great solution. And that just shows that I'm willing to have my mind changed, even when I think there's certain great ideas that I or others come up with. And so I do want to make this an open discussion. I am not locked into any position aside from the fact that I don't want to do just registration and try to get the data, because we have them out there for that. They can have the data for us. What did they say? Something like 3 months, Jeremy?
Yep.
I think they can link to actual addresses within 3 months. They can have all that information for us. And so we know exactly where they are. And that's pretty easy once you have the address to find out if that's the person's primary residence. So I guess that we're getting close to, well, it's only not, we still have some time. So there was something I was trying to, I heard that I was going to jump in on, but I wanted to make sure everybody else got to speak, and I'm trying to remember what I had.
Pat has her hand up.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Pat. You can fill some space. That'd be great.
And I don't know if this is too idealistic, but if it helps at all, I mean, I think at least just one piece to the solution of having more available housing is that I think it really has to start at a community grassroots level. And that includes people working together within the community. How idealistic, like I said, that may be, I don't know, and I think it's also good to remind people that there are multiple ways that available housing can be addressed. And this is just one of those pieces.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, just I think if we make that clear to people when we come up with anything.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And it's a common refrain. If you want to affect available housing, build more housing. Right? Easier said than done, but that's clearly logical. I mean, if you want more housing, if you want to affect housing, build more housing. And that's certainly one of the things that the town should be looking at. And obviously the new density rules is another prong of that fork, is sort of the language that I'm using on this. And then, the regulation of short-term rentals could be another prong of that fork. And then you could look at other options as well. There might even be ways to incentivize. We heard that there are some places that are just offering to pay back to people the amount that they would earn. I mean, I think it's ludicrous, but the amount that they would earn for not renting out, then putting it into the short-term market. I mean, into the long-term market. And then, also I think one of Bangor's things is 28-day minimums, right? And so that leaves open the option of people who come for nurses or maybe the main media workshop. Those types of people aren't completely frozen out. That's another thing to look at and consider, because I do see value in all of these. There is value, and I've been open and honest about, when I go travel, I often prefer to stay in an Airbnb because I like to have a kitchen. I like to be able to cook. I like to have a little more space than you get in a hotel room. I like to have a backyard, things like that. There's plenty of reasons why it's not a bad thing. It's just when it's overrunning the town that I think that we're really, I mean, when you look at, like, I don't know if you keep an eye on the houses for sale in town, but there are more coming on the market now. But anything in the under $1 million, they're on the market for a couple of days and then they're gone.
And they're cash purchases.
Yeah, and they're cash purchases. And I can tell you, if you tell me that families are coming in and moving in there, I would be thrilled to hear that. But I'm not so sure that that's what's happening, because if I had a couple million lying around and a house for $250,000 came up in Camden that looks like a little cottage that I could rent out for $4,000 a month, the math isn't that hard. That's a profit. And so, there's plenty of that going on, and we can find all that information out. And I think that is, Jeremy, I think one of the questions is, how do we go about making the determination that, yes, we want to get the data from Granicus, or another group. I mean, maybe we should do due diligence and meet with another group. I'm not sure if that's required. I don't know if there's like a bid process or anything that we have to go through, or if we get a budget, if you have a budget, or if we have to go to the select board for a budget, or if the town manager provides that. I honestly don't know how that works.
Yeah, I've got to see how much it costs. what their estimate is, and I do have a small budget for a planning board. Generally, those things have covered, it's odd, those things have covered, notices and things like that when we do zoning amendments.
Yeah.
But that's what that covers. When applicants do them, we get reimbursed for those, so. But I'll see what we have, I'll see what we can do. If it's under a certain dollar amount, I think 5,000, I can just do it. Department head, I think, can do it if it's budgeted. And I would suggest the planning board stuff is budgeted. Because
Okay. I just assumed that we were talking closer to 10, 15, 20,000 to get them.
I'll look into it.
It
Okay,
seems it's sort of like a kindling for a fire, and that, I would imagine that we would set a business license and a registration fee high enough to pay for continuing support.
Oh, eventually, for sure.
absolutely, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. You're right, it is a fire starter and that's it. This should be a self-sufficient
For sure.
operation by the end, yeah.
Yep.
But I think that's good direction, Jeremy, that
is.
let's get, I don't think we need, I mean, unless you all disagree, but I don't think we need to be talking to Granicus about bringing in Jeffrey as a consultant at this point. He had some good information and was very helpful, but I would like to see how much we can sort of bounce ideas off him without having a full consultant fee. And just try to learn from their past experiences, like they've shared some with us, and then start to narrow down. And maybe if everybody, it's hard to say what we would do, but like maybe if we had Pat, you're great with a spreadsheet. I have an idea.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think it's really simple, and I could probably do it. But if you're willing, what if you just sort of just for each board member to have in front of them, outright ban on unhosted short-term rentals, yay, nay, maybe. Cap on short-term rentals, unhosted short-term rentals, yay, nay, maybe. And then we as a board can sort of go down that chart of all the different options that we're talking about, and maybe just get a better map individually of where we stand, and then see where we align. Because right now,
Are you
Go ahead.
talking, Ethan, about just the board and then ban on short-term rentals, cap on short-term rentals, maybe other categories? Is that what you're?
yeah, some other things. I mean, I'm open to suggestions to what else should be on there, but like a lottery system.
Okay.
Just different types of ideas that we've heard. Limited, again, we heard. I know that I didn't pull that. I think it was from the Cape Elizabeth ordinance that they had like the sort of the maximum number of weeks that they could be done. I've heard the feedback that those are a nightmare to enforce. However, I also think that if you are found in violation of this, you lose your ability to rent short-term ever again in the town of Camden. People might toe the line, or maybe maybe they don't. So I
Okay.
guess maybe we could sort of have a brainstorm session about the types of things that could go on that list.
Mhm.
Because I think everybody's in favor of registration, inspection, safety, that, compliance part of it. Like, I think we all have voiced that. And I know that Christo sort of gave his relative proxy to a lot of these things. But if there are categories that I'm missing or methodology that I'm missing,
Mhm.
that's what I think we should be talking about. Like, what are even just looking at other towns that we've already gathered all that data, like just pulling from those, like the different tactics that they use, and whether that would be something that we think is good or bad, or maybe,
Mhm. Okay.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yep, that's fine.
Like maybe like a matrix, like sort of, and do you want to link it with the goals and like say, these are our goals, and here's the tools, or I don't know. Here's the things we could implement, like you're saying, the cap.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think the goals can sort of be this. I personally, I think that gets it a little bit too complicated. But I think having the goals as like sort of everybody having that in front of them as they look at the different options, I think would
Okay.
absolutely make sense.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. All right. Sounds good.
Maybe fines can be another one.
Fines, yep.
Supportive of
Yeah, I
fines.
mean, fines and loss of license. And then, other ways of regulating, whether it's like, no fewer than, one of the questions we have is, it's already in the ordinance, like no fewer than 7 days. Is that something we're standing on? Because believe me, that is being violated
Okay.
left and right. And there's no enforcement of that at all.
Hardly.
Or is it, or is there like a different category for, should we create a different category for 7 days and then 28 days like Bangor has, which is sort of, to say, more like nurses, or it's sort of more, or main media workshops, or the furniture workshop or something like that. Maybe even that would address summer camps. I don't know. Like, also, that's another one. Summer camps, traditional vacation rentals in town. Are we in favor of protecting those, or those kinds of things? Anybody else have any thoughts on the brainstorm category? Other things we haven't discussed?
Well, the one about, I think Chriso had brought it up, where one of the goals was to allow people to continue to rent their homes. Let's say if they go away in the summer or something for a short period of time.
Sure. So something like a 28-day minimum would probably allow them to do that, right? They're not going straight into the short-term rental, because that's part of the thing about the short-term rental is you're doing a much more transient business. And most of the short-term rentals that I've been involved with, when I go travel, people are staying there for 3, 4, 6 days, and then they're going on somewhere else, and that brings in a lot of influx of people. Whereas if somebody's leaving for the summer and wants to rent out their house, they can still get a pretty penny if they rent it for 3 months.
Yeah,
They just don't have to be in the short-term business, because that's not short-term then, right? So if our definition is 28 days is not short-term, or 30 days is not short-term, then that allows people to rent for 30-day periods. Obviously, you can do that right now, right, with a traditional month-to-month lease.
mhm. Okay.
Do you have any other criteria, Shenley or Jeremy? Even though you're not on the board, we certainly welcome any things that we might be overlooking that we've been talking about over the years.
I think the traditional camps on the lakes are important.
Yeah.
It's also, you may want to allow those to continue. And if someone's going to convert one of those and change it into a year-round home, maybe that's where you don't get to rent that anymore.
I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because there's a heck of a lot of, I know we're not like up in Kakaja or up in the Allagash or something, but there is something special in Maine about the traditional camps on the lakes. I mean, that is something that, is something from a land use and a societal levels pretty unique and worth saving. And if all of those camps go away and turn into year-round homes, and they're all rented out, or some of them are rented out, it's a very different feeling and very different lake.
Yeah, and many of those camps are passed down from generation to generation in this area. So
Yeah, I would definitely
absolutely
agree with that.
So do you think you have enough guidance, Pat? And then
Yeah, I
you can
do.
sort of I think, Jeremy, I just want to get clear on if Pat drafts a document and then passes it around for comment, is that something that we just need to provide in the public record? I mean, it's not an actual meeting. I don't want to run afoul of having a public meeting without authorization or whatever, having the
Right.
public
I think the best scenario is for Pat to maybe send it out to everyone. And then everyone could, do something
bring it to a meeting.
do something on their own and then bring it to a meeting, bring it to me, and then I could send it out ahead of time as part of supplemental information for the upcoming meeting.
I
That
like
sounds great.
I like that approach.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't get into a
Yeah.
whole thing where all of a sudden they're coming for our emails. Like
Yeah,
we're
no,
starting
I
emailing
get
back
it.
and forth.
I get it. And you
Yeah.
can't email back and forth. You guys know that stuff. So,
Right.
I don't
That's
know.
why I send out the thing and I don't expect any comments back on my articles.
Right. And there is Chris Collins here, Ethan. I don't know if you want to just at least offer him some time to say anything if he wants to. I just know you've got time, you got to run at a certain time and it's 6:05.
Yep. Yeah, Chris, go ahead if you like.
Hey, good afternoon. Hey, and I stopped driving too. So, first of all, I want to compliment you all for your volunteering your time for the benefit of the community. And I think it's really great. It's a very thoughtful conversation, and I certainly commiserate with some of the challenges of a small town as Camden. So I do want to just raise one concern. As a homeowner, my wife and I, in 3 or 4 years, plan to move to Camden. We bought a house there that we love, and we are doing Airbnb rentals. We registered it. We're paying the taxes both as a homeowner and through the rental property, system of VRBO, Airbnb, whatever. And just a couple things. I think, the price of homes in Camden, obviously it's pretty high now. And my guess is that's probably not going to go down. And I think there are a lot of people, first of all, there may be cash offers, but there are processes out there that allow you to apply for a mortgage that is, like we did this, it came across as a cash offer, but it's actually a mortgage. And so we have a mortgage on the home. We are relying on Airbnb rentals to help pay for that mortgage. So it's not a commercial business for us. That's really the only way we can afford to have this house right now. And again, it's with our intention of moving to the town. So it's an interesting proposition. I would like to think that you're not trying to penalize people who want to move to the town and become citizens. So I appreciate the fact that you're trying not to ban what's referred to as unhosted rentals, because we in theory, we actually have a property manager who's there taking care of the guests. We've taken care of the home. We're trying to be part of the community. We've got our neighbors and all that. So I appreciate you considering my comments about that. I read the information from Granicus. I'm in the construction business myself, so I thought it was a very, very interesting topic, and obviously has quite a bit of information. And I encourage you to really think about what you're trying to solve in the community, whether it's you're trying to prevent party houses, which I would support that too. And you're trying to make sure that, obviously, the biggest thing I've heard here is that the housing stock for people who are locals, is diminishing. And I agree that you're probably not going to solve this problem all on the back of short-term rentals, but it is a continuing issue in the community, and I get that. I guess the last comment I would have is that I think it's a different market for Airbnbs. And we have 2 kids, and when we travel, we, like a lot of people who do Airbnbs, will want to stay there where we can cook some of our own meals. It becomes, if we're traveling with our kids and we stay in a hotel, we'll just go to a different town, because we don't want to have to get 2 hotel rooms or cram in. So it's kind of nice to have an Airbnb for a number of reasons. And I think it really is a different market than the people who stay in hotels. My wife and I are now empty nesters, and it's a different market for us when we go travel. So hope I'm not rambling too much there. Again, I want to appreciate the time to jump in, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
I appreciate it. I would just comment too. I appreciate it, Chris. We had talked about trying to ensure those that are complying with current regulations to somehow get them into, there's a lot to play out here, but somehow allow them to continue or have, first come or first dibs on some of the licenses. So I think that's a carrot that I have kind of conveyed to people. I will say, because this is how other communities have done it, especially those that are piecemeal approach, where you start with an ordinance and hard to enforce because there's really no funding, and there's no, the community can't engage a firm to assist. So I appreciate it, and I get it, and I would assume the board hears that as well, and I think we've talked about that specific aspect of it before.
Yeah, and I thank you, Chris, for your comments. I really do appreciate that. You know, I'm familiar with the sort of the mortgage. You know, you're essentially saying that the mortgage is based on the income that you're receiving from the property. Is that sort of how it's crafted?
No, it was actually, it's interesting. It was a new product actually, and there was a bank that does this. And what they did is they guaranteed the loan because we have good credit. So it came across as a cash offer because if for whatever reason our financing fell through, then the bank would guarantee they would buy it. So it was as good as a cash offer.
Okay.
But it's still a leveraged property and we're still paying a mortgage.
Got it. Yeah. So the reason why I asked that is because there are people who are able to get mortgages based on the projected income of a short-term rental, which is essentially like, you know, in the past you had to show 2 or 3 years of rental history, right, in order to be able to count any of that income. And now people are able to advance that just by it'll lease for this. And I don't mean to be sort of argumentative or anything, but I would like to ask a question if you don't mind. And that is, if
Of course.
you know, in general, is it the position that if you put that house into the long-term rental market, you wouldn't be covering your mortgage?
It's a great question. I'll tell you that if we try and rent it out for what the market's bearing, it's a small house. We wouldn't be able to cover, you know, the mortgage. We wouldn't be making any profit. I'll say that definitely.
Okay, but that's different than not
And we kind
covering
of knew
the
that
mortgage.
going in, so it's supplemental. That's correct. I mean, there is a little bit more income because of the Airbnb part of it, but it's only for a certain part of the year, right? And we're actually, I think a lot of people do this where they're looking for a winter renter, because the rent rates are lower in the winter, right? Off season.
Right. Yeah, no, that's helpful. I really was curious. Anyone else want to say something? I've got to jump off, but I'm willing to let this carry on without me.
Yeah, I had the same question as Ethan, so thank you. Whether you had actually tried to put it in long-term rental.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to wrap this up, I guess, just because I've got to run to my kid's school and meet all his teachers. I hope he hasn't made too bad of an impression already. All right, so I guess thank you everyone though for your participation, and Chris, you are always welcome back, and we would like to have more input from anybody and open discussion. So thank you for sharing your side of it.
I do have an unrelated question for Jeremy. That Ethan, you can stay or go as you need, but
okay, I'm gonna take off. I've got to get out.
all right.
Thanks, everybody.
Ethan.
Thanks, Ethan.
Jeremy, maybe we can debrief just a little bit. This came back to me when we were talking about housing issues. And how you have to address it through a number of avenues, but I saw where the select board rejected the ordinance language change that would permit some residential uses at the mill building and I guess even the Montessori school. So do you have thoughts on that? And I'll just finish my second thought on that. I did not know that the town, was a lien holder on the property. So I was a little surprised by that, and it wouldn't have changed my vote, but I thought that might have been good information to have in our discussion.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say anything to that really, John. I mean, I think the meeting speaks for itself and what the select board says, I just would let it speak for itself. There, you know, it kind of took me aback a little bit. But their comment, I think, really was about need to have more conversation about these kinds of things. And such a change. And my comeback multiple times was, we have public workshops, we have public hearings, we advertise like we're required to do, we send out email blasts to 150 some odd people that have always wanted to get, planning board agendas. What more can we do? I don't know. I mean, I think too that people, I just think it's not apathy, but I think just people are just wired differently than they were a number of years ago. A lot of people were engaged doing the comp plan work. I think just people are far less engaged in local government boards and involved. And it's just the reality of life, I think, now. And so, I mean, we've held lots of hearings for lots of different amendments and lots of projects or a few projects over the course of the years. And there's rarely ever any public comment about anything. And I mean, I think from my perspective, we're doing the right thing, right? Like it's not creating a stir. The marijuana stuff certainly did, but that was a group of people that, were very vocal on that issue. But this other stuff, there's been no vocal opposition other than, I mean, short-term rental, you hear, you heard Alex Cohen came, but traditionally it hasn't stirred up any issues with people. So I was taken aback by it. I figured it would have gone through, especially having the discussion with them the week before, 2 weeks before, because they don't just get the hearing that day. They get I give it to them before and they have some time to read it, and those questions didn't come up the prior meeting. So it is what it is. But
Okay.
I still think it's important, especially for those two buildings, to try to move those along. And I'm going to, I guess, try to move those along in another way. And it just might take a little more discussion with them and maybe advocacy from the planning board and community members. I mean, I heard, Pat mentioning what other things is the town doing, or, can we push housing projects or affordable housing projects? I mean, we don't have a lot of land that the town owns that we can do things on. We have the tannery site. And that went the way the tannery site did. There was a residential project proposed for that, and didn't play out. 50 units. We had Sagamore Farm. I did a request for proposals, if you will, for that. I've got 2 residential projects, and those never went anywhere. So we have a couple of lots around, small lots, like house lot size, that I know that there's the group, the Mid-Coast Housing Trust, is interested in meeting with me to see if there's anything available in the town of Camden that they could maybe try to do a project or push a project. So I'm going to meet with them. We don't have a lot of incentives that we can provide people. It's just not what municipal governments do. In Maine, we don't have that ability really. We're getting, hopefully, fingers crossed, if the government doesn't shut down, we're getting a special allocation, congressional allocation from Senator King and Collins' office of $1.3 million to bring sewer down from Mountainside Community Park. The project's going to be actually a lot more than the 1.3, unfortunately, but we're looking at ways to get other funding, and I think we'll get there. But that'll bring sewer to Mountainside Mobile Home Park Co-op owned, which is a huge thing, and it will also bring sewer down that part of 52 and Molyneux Road as well. So there'll be more opportunity for more dense housing in that run. So hopefully that helps. And then we have John Street too. we may try to do a sewer. There was talk of doing a sewer extension down John to open up some more land up that way. But we're gonna try to do those things, Pat, and we're working. I helped start that Mid-Coast Housing Trust, get off the ground, and so I'm glad that they're coming back wanting to talk. So, unless I was on a workshop with Shenley today, unless you've got a developer that is applying for tax credits, and they get low income housing tax credits or, senior tax credits, there's no projects being developed, and to get on those, to get points, you have to have, there's a whole scoring of things, are you on sewer? Are you on water? How close are you to downtown? How, do you have public transportation? So we always miss that public transportation number, so we're trying, and I think zoning wise, that's about what we can do. I mean, we're really, facilitating a lot of development if developers want to come in, or developers, I mean, even single family homeowners that want to add another building next to them or behind them, we're providing those opportunities. It's just, we'll see. It's one at a time doesn't really, make a dent. But I hear all the time about, folks trying to, hire employees, but they can't find a place to live here in town. I mean, I think the folks over Long Grain are building residential upstairs primarily for some of their workers. So, all right, that's what I got.
What meeting was that of the select board that you're talking about, John?
That was
No,
2 weeks ago, a month ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
We don't know what exact day.
I can find it, Pat, and shoot it to you.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
oh, and last comment, Jeremy, if I can help with public outreach by going to talk to a Chamber of Commerce or something on short-term rentals,
Sure.
let me know.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I'm happy to talk to the lodging industry just so that they reach out.
Yeah, it's important, and originally this whole issue started with the lodging industry for a good reason. So I think involving the community is what needs to happen. And like Ethan said, something will get sent to voters or it won't. And I think getting to that place is important. So I appreciate all of what you guys do and your time. And John, I'm going to circle back with you. Shenley and I will on wording, because I think that's really important, what you mentioned and how you stated it. So,
Hey, I'm out of town until Tuesday.
okay, sounds good. No worries.
And thank you, Pat, for doing the chart.
Oh, yeah. Oh, one note, you guys. Sorry, I didn't think to say this earlier. Just an FYI. I mean, as of now, we're supposed to be out of town from the 29th of September through the 30th of October. And I will try to attend those meetings remotely, though, Jeremy.
Okay, and we won't likely have any hearings before that or any project before that for you guys to do so. We'll try to keep working on this short-term rental and peers maybe. The French conference room has a new audio video tech system. So I haven't used it yet, nor Shenley, but I guess it's much better for use of Zoom and YouTube, both for the user on remotely and in person. So that's very helpful. I've always found some of those select board meetings hard to listen to on Zoom and participate in, but okay, sounds good.
Okay, thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shenley.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
All right, take care.
Got to do YouTube first.